All right, hello everyone. Welcome to my channel. I'm Thomas and I do educational videos on this channel. Mainly people who have worked on usually a theory of everything or some kind of all-encompassing kind of theory, worked on it for their whole life, put something out and didn't get recognized. And so I'm trying things that I've studied for whatever reason that I think are very valuable, but nobody knows about them. And so one of the things that we're working on here is to study the reciprocal system of theory. And this is a system that was developed by Dewey B. Larson in the 20th century up until his death in 1990. Put out a lot of books, a lot of articles. They all kind of started with two main postulates. The gist of it is that in Larson's universe, we have a universe of motion. The universe is not made out of matter. It's not made out of energy. It's made out of motion. Motion is the relationship between space and time. Motion is basically a fraction with space as the numerator and time as the denominator, or vice versa. And really space and time have no existence other than them coming together in motion. Matter and energy are in fact just two of the many different kinds of motion. Matter is time to the third power over space to the third power, and energy is time over space. Other relationships that either we know or he derived, basically speed. Speed is space over time. 10 miles per hour. The car is going 10 miles per hour. 10 miles of space in 1 hour of time. Acceleration, space over time to the second power. I dropped the rock and it fell at 9.8 meters per second per second. That is space over time to the second power. Pressure. Pressure is time over space to the fourth power. And so on and so forth. These are not really arbitrary. They were derived by Larson through his system. That's basically how he did it. He started out with these two basic postulates, and then he derived an entire theoretical universe from those postulates, and then linked it up with the universe that already has been observed and measured by the guys in the white lab coats, and found many positive matches, that this is this and this is that and this is that. And so that's how he identified the different things that kind of came out of his theoretical system. Now, we are in the middle of looking at his 1979 book, Nothing But Motion. This book is primarily on physics and some organic chemistry. This is the first of his three book series called The Structure of the Physical Universe, edition 2. He also then in this series has a book on chemistry called Basic Properties of Matter, and one on astronomy called A Universe of Motion. But this one is Nothing But Motion, and we are in chapter 5, which is on gravitation. And he's kind of explaining how gravitation is really a little bit of an illusion in that it appears as if different particles or atoms are being attracted to one another, when actually they're just independently pursuing their own course, and it makes it appear as if there's some kind of attraction. And again, uh, when Larson says that the universe is made out of motion, he's particularly referring to what we call scalar motion. A scalar motion is a motion that has a magnitude, but it has no direction, and that you can most easily visualize a scalar motion by taking a balloon and a magic marker and putting a bunch of dots on the balloon. When you blow up the balloon, all of the dots are moving away from each other, but in no particular direction or in all directions. It doesn't matter what direction you're going, they're moving away from each other. And the further away they are, the faster they're moving away from each other. This was confirmed by the Hubble telescope in the 1920s. And for the distant galaxies, they're all moving away from each other. So gravitation is really an inward scalar motion where you take the balloon and you suck it in. All of the dots are now moving toward each other. And that is the same kind of relationship as the gravitational one that he's talking about. So we're going to take over here, or let Larson take over here. One of the questions that is frequently asked is how this finding that the gravitational motion of each aggregate is completely independent of all others can be reconciled with the observed fact that the direction of the apparent mutual gravitational force between two objects changes if either object moves. On the face of it, there appears to be a necessity for some kind of an interaction. The explanation is that the gravitational motion of an object never changes, either in amount or in direction. It is always directed from the location of the gravitating object, of the gravitating unit, toward all other space and time locations. But we cannot observe the motion of an object inward in space. We can only observe its motion relative to other objects whose presence we can detect. The motion of each object therefore appears to be directed toward the other objects, but in fact, it is directed toward all locations in space and time, irrespective of whether or not they happen to be occupied. Whatever changes appear to take place in the gravitational phenomena by reason of change of position of any of the gravitating masses are not changes in the gravitational motions, but changes in our ability to detect these motions. Let us assume a mass unit X occupying location A and moving gravitationally toward locations B and C. If these locations are not occupied, then we cannot detect this motion at all. If location B is occupied by mass unit Y, then we see X moving toward Y. That is, we can now observe the motion of X toward location B. But its motion toward location C is still unobservable. The observable gravitational motion of Y is toward X and has the direction BA. Now, if we assume that Y moves to location C, what happens? The essence of the theory is that the motion of X is not changed at all. It is entirely independent of the position of object Y. But we are now able to observe the motion of X toward C because there is a physical object at that location, whereas we are no longer able to observe the motion of X toward location B, even though that motion exists just as definitely as before. The direction of the gravitational motion or force of X thus appears to have changed, but What has actually happened is that some previously unobservable motion has become observable, while some previously observable motion has become unobservable. The same is true of the motion of object y. It now appears to be moving in the direction CA rather than in the direction BA. But here again, there has been no actual change other than the change in the position of y. Gravitationally, y is moving in all directions at all times, irrespective of whether or not that motion is observable. The foregoing explanation has been presented in terms of individual mass units rather than aggregates, as the basic equation with respect to the effect of variable mass on the gravitational motion has not yet been considered. The discussion will be extended to multiple units in the next chapter. As emphasized in Chapter 3, the identification of a second general force or motion to which all matter is subject provides the must-needed antagonist to gravitation and enables explaining many phenomena that have never been satisfactorily explained on the basis of only one general force. It is the interaction of these two general forces that determines the course of major physical events. The controlling factor is the distance intervening between the objects that are involved. Inasmuch as the progression of space and time is merely a manifestation of the movement of the natural reference system with respect to the conventional stationary system of reference, the space progression originates everywhere, and its magnitude is always the same, 1 unit of space per unit of time. Gravitation, on the other hand, originates at the specific locations which the gravitating objects happen to occupy. Its effects are therefore distributed over a volume of extension space, the size of which varies with the distance from the material object. In three-dimensional space, the fraction of the inward motion directed toward a unit at distance d from the object is inversely proportional to the total area at that distance. That is, to the surface of a sphere of radius d. The effective portion of the total inward motion is thus inversely proportional to d squared. This is the inverse square law to which gravitation conforms, according to empirical findings. The net resultant of these two general motions in each specific case depends on their relative magnitudes. At the shorter distances, gravitation predominates, and in the realm of ordinary experience, all aggregate of matter are subject to net gravitational motions. But since the progression of the natural reference system is constant at unit speed, while the opposing gravitational motion is attenuated by distance, in accordance with the inverse square law, it follows that at some specific distance, the gravitational limit of the aggregate of matter under consideration, the motions reach equality. Beyond this point, the net movement is outward, increasing toward the speed of light as the gravitational effect continues to decrease. Okay, these are fundamental relations that Larson is really talking about. This gravitational limit is something that Larson uses to derive many, many different relationships. In particular, in astronomy, each planet, each body, each star, each planet, each galaxy they all have gravitational limits. And basically, they have 2 gravitational limits in Larson's system, possibly 3. And, within those limits, those are really like the domains of those bodies, and everything comes toward that planet or star when it's within that gravitational limit. If it's outside the gravitational limit, then it's moving away, and then there is another gravitational limit, basically beyond which things are moving at the speed of light. So now Bruce Perret is kind of taking him to task on some of these gravitational limit calculations. Like for the sun, the first gravitational limit is something like 3.61 light years, which is a huge amount. That basically means that Pluto is, I think, not even 1/4 of a light day from the sun. So a light year is almost 1,500 times that amount, and he's talking about 3 light years. So all the way out to Pluto is only 1, 4 or 5,000th of the gravitational limit, the inward gravitational, not inward, but the inner gravitational limit. And then the other gravitational limit for the sun, I believe, is something on the order of 13,350 light years. And that's beyond that point, there is absolutely no gravitation, and then that body appears to be moving at the speed of light away from the sun. Okay, he'll get into that. He also uses this gravitational limit kind of in the inverse to determine things such as the interatomic distance. So he uses this in the atomic realm as well as in the astronomical realm. And that is one of the beauties of the reciprocal system, is that, when you read Larson the first book or two, you're kind of like, where is he getting this? He's just kind of like fudging his numbers to get the outcomes he's looking for, and he's just kind of introducing concepts out of no place and just kind of plugging them in. But if you read enough of his books, you recognize that he's using the exact same methodology in these widely divergent fields. And, you recognize that it's not arbitrary. He's using a system. Our ability to understand his system doesn't come until we've read a few of his books. Probably, a half dozen of his books. And then you can start to see that he's really using the same general patterns, the same procedures, but in different contexts. And you can really see that, and then you can really see that this really is a system that he's built. And it's not, there's nothing arbitrary about it. He's applying the same procedures every time. Okay, back to Larson. As a rough analogy, we may visualize a moving belt traveling outward from a central location and carrying an assortment of cubes and balls. The outward travel of the belt represents the progression of the natural reference system. The cubes are analogous to the photons of radiation. Having no independent mobility of their own, they must necessarily remain permanently at whatever locations on the belt they occupy initially, and they therefore move outward from the point of origin at the full speed of the belt. The balls, however, can be caused to rotate, and if the rotation is in the direction opposite to the travel of the belt, and the rotational speed is high enough, the balls will move inward instead of outward. These balls represent the atoms of matter. And the inward motion opposite to the direction of the travel of the belt is analogous to gravitation. We could include the distance factor in the analogy by introducing some means of varying the speed of rotation of the balls with the distance from the central point. Under this arrangement, the closer balls would still move inward, but at some point farther out, there would be an equilibrium, and beyond this point, the balls would move outward. The analogy is incomplete, particularly in that the mechanism whereby the rotation of the balls causes them to move inward translationally is not the same as that which causes the inward motion of the atoms. Nevertheless, it does show quite clearly that under appropriate conditions, a rotational motion can cause a translational displacement, and it gives us a good picture of the general relations between the progression of the natural reference system, gravitational motion, and the travel of the photons of radiation. Okay, we'll stop it there. Start up tomorrow. Go over these visualizations very slowly. Listen to me at 1/2 speed or something, and you might get it over and over. Okay, talk to you tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in.